capsule is going to be right around the glomerulus, right? So almost think of it as like a cup, and then the glomerulus goes into it. So here's the capsule. Okay. And then what's this first part called?
Proximal convoluted
tubule. So I'll just label it right here, PCT. And convoluted, by the way, means twisted. So if you look at it, you notice it's actually like windy. Okay, and then what's this down here?
Loop of Henle.
Loop of Henle. So I'll label it here, loop of Henle. Okay, followed by
Distal convoluted tubule.
distal convoluted tubule, and then finally my
Collecting duct.
collecting duct. All right, and notice at the very end of my collecting duct on the diagram, there's a little arrow, and what does that say? Urine. So in other words, whatever ends up in my tubule, notice it's going to be excreted as urine. So keep that in mind. Whatever comes down my collecting duct, at the end of my collecting duct, that's going to be your urine. Okay, good. So we're going to start off with that. Quick anatomy review. So the goal is to get my waste into my tubules because that's going to be urinated out. All right, so here we've got the nephron. We started making the structure of it. We know the job, again, is to filter the blood. So you're going to filter all of the blood plasma. You're going to make what's called filtrate. That's going to be in your tubule, and then you're going to urinate it out. Okay. There's the structure called the renal corpuscle. All the renal corpuscle is basically your glomerulus and your glomerular capsule. So this very first part, right here, where your glomerulus and your capsule are together, this is your renal corpuscle. And then after that, you go through all of your tubules, right? That's your PCT, your loop of Henle, your DCT, and your collecting duct. So when we talk about the nephron, you've got the beginning part, and then you've got all the tubules. All right. Okay. Now, notice in your drawing, I also have blood. Remember, the whole goal is to filter your blood. So it makes sense that the nephron has to interact with blood. So the two places you see the blood, first is the glomerulus, right up here. And then you'll notice that blood is parallel to the rest of your tubules. So wherever you have the tubules, you'll have blood right next to it. Right? So we're always going to be seeing how the blood interacts with our tubules. In other words, how do we filter the blood, get the waste out into our urine? All right. So next, let's go through together and label the blood capillary. So we've got peritubular capillary, and those are going to be the blood vessels that are near the PCT, DCT, and collecting duct. And then specifically, when you get to the blood capillaries near the loop of Henle, it's called the vasa recta. So let's go ahead and label these together. So the blood I'm talking about is this blood that's coming next to your tubule. So again, the peritubular capillaries, we'll find right here. So I'm going to just label it here. My peritubular capillaries. And then specifically when you get down to the vasa recta, near the loop of Henle down here, this would be called the vasa recta. And then otherwise, peritubular capillaries. Okay, questions on that? Yeah, Sarah.
So does the blood in the capsule or capillaries interact with the blood in the nephron, or does the glomerulus the only?
Okay, so we're going to see, good question. Where is the blood interacting with the nephron? So glomerulus blood, we're going to show how it plays a role with the glomerular capsule. So these two are going to work together. And then we're going to see that the paratubular capillaries all the way through interact with the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. Yeah, so we're going to have interaction up here, and then we're going to have this interaction throughout the rest. Okay. All right. Before we get into the details of understanding how the blood and the nephron interact and how we filter the blood and make the urine, let's quickly go through how we can eliminate urine. So let's just say we've gone through the whole process. We made urine. We've got the urine going down to the bladder. All right. This process is called micturition. So micturition is just a fancy word of when you need to urinate. All right. So how do you guys know, hey, it's time to go to the bathroom? How do you know?
Your bladder feels full.
You feel like your bladder's full, right? You start to feel pressure in your bladder, right? That's the trigger. It's like, okay, it's time to go. All right. So that's really what initiates this whole what we call reflux. Is your bladder feels full, or in other words, your bladder's stretched. So you actually can stretch your bladder, right? Once the urine fills up in your bladder, you start to stretch the walls of your bladder, and you have these little triggers that say, oh, my bladder's being stretched, it's full. All right. What happens is, once your bladder is stretched, it sends a signal out to the micturition reflex center. That's just located in your sacral spinal cord. What level is sacral? High, low? The most inferior part, right? So that your sacral spinal cord is the last segment of your spinal cord. Right about level with your bladder. So bladder stretches, right? That's the sensory signal. It goes to your micturition reflex center, which is your integration center. And from there, you activate your muscle, right? You got your motor output. So notice it's that same pattern we've seen, right? Sensory input, integration center, motor output. The motor output goes to this huge muscle called the detrusor muscle. The detrusor muscle encirculates the entire bladder. So it's this one huge circular muscle. And when the detrusor muscle is activated and it contracts, what it really does is basically squeezes inward on your bladder. Right? So when it contracts and squeezes inward on your bladder, where's your urine going to go? Yeah, it's going to get pushed out the urethra. Now, here's an important thing. Let's say your bladder gets stretched. This reflex is activated, but you're nowhere near the toilet. Do you want the urine to go out the urethra at that point? No. Luckily for you guys, you have a safety mechanism. That safety mechanism is the external urethral sphincter. This urethral sphincter is right here at the the exit of the bladder. And fortunately for us, this sphincter is a skeletal muscle. What is so important about skeletal muscle?
Voluntary.
Voluntary, yes. So even if the reflex gets initiated, you go to contract the detrusor muscle, you'll feel that. You'll feel the pressure. But as long as you voluntarily say, no, it's not time to go, what you're going to do is you're going to contract or keep this urethral sphincter closed. If you contract it, it's like a circular muscle. If you contract it, it's closed. Now, when you get over the toilet and you say, okay, now I can go, then you voluntarily relax the urethral sphincter. It opens up, and now you have a passageway for the urine to flow. So importantly, even if the reflex goes, if you voluntarily decide to contract and close that urethral sphincter, the external one, you won't go. At what age do you get control over that external urethral sphincter?
2 to 5.
2, 3?
10 years old.
Right? It's another question of like, what are you potty trained? Right? So potty training is actually teaching, right, the kid to voluntarily control that urethral sphincter. Okay, questions on that? All right. Okay. So again, two major muscles involved, the detrusor muscle, which is just part of a reflex, and then that external urethral sphincter, which you can voluntarily control as a healthy adult. Okay, so if all of that's there, good to go, then you can actually urinate and release your urine.
Quick question, for people that are like, disabled or like, lose neural, function below their waist, how does all these functions still?
Yeah, that's a great question. How, for people who have a disability where they lose nervous control function below the waist, or let's take someone who's, for example, paralyzed, right? Maybe even paralyzed neck on down. If you're paralyzed, will you still have this micturition reflex? What do you guys think?
Yes, it's not voluntary.
Here's another question. Take a look at the reflex, steps 1, 2, and then to the detrusor muscle. Does it involve the brain at all?
No.
The reflex itself, notice, never needs to go to the brain. The reflex itself is just bladder to sacrospinal cord, back to the bladder muscle. So someone who's actually paralyzed, they'll still urinate, right? What they don't have is the connection from the brain to that external urethral sphincter, right? The signal for this has to come from the brain. So if you're paralyzed, yes, you'll still urinate, but you won't be able to control when you do so, right? And so that's why they normally have the bag attached to them, because it's just constantly, they're ready, because whenever the reflex is activated, they'll urinate.
So basically paralyzed is just all voluntary movement is.
Right, that voluntary movement is gone because the voluntary movement comes from the brain, right? You can't communicate brain down, but you'll still have the reflex, which is just located within the bladder and the sacrospinal cord. Yeah, good question.
Are you still able to like filtrate, accurately?
Yeah, that's a good
Still
question.
have to
Yeah,
communicate to the-
are you still able to filtrate accurately? Yes, absolutely. Your kidney can work without brain function. You might not be filtering, we'll talk about it in a little bit, you might not be filtering at the right rate, but you will still be able to filter, right? Which is why you'll also still be able to make urine.
So people who aren't paralyzed but can't control it, would that be a bladder problem?
Yeah, okay, so you're allowed to ask people who aren't paralyzed but can't control their urination. For example, really young kids, or you might even see it as progressively elderly adults, right? What are they losing control over? The external urethral sphincter, right? So what they're losing control over is their voluntary control from the brain down to that sphincter, right? Like any muscle over time, as you age, it gets hard to control your muscle. Yeah. All right. So again, that's the key, right? That's your voluntary control. So you don't get it when you're really young, and you might lose it when you get really old. All right. So now that we understand in general kind of the structure of the nephron that's going to filter your blood and make your urine, and we understand how to eliminate, now we can get into the details of making sure you filter your blood properly and make your urine appropriately. So every single minute, if you look at one of your kidneys, is filtering through 1,200 cc's of blood. Remember, cc is the same as milliliters. So in urinary system, they often reference it as cc. So kind of just as a kind of gauge, about 2 of these. Right? So every minute, my right kidney has to filter about 2 bottles of blood, right? Which is quite a bit. Right? When it filters through the 1,200 cc's of blood, and again, that's going through my glomerulus, out of that 1,200 cc's, about 125 of it becomes filtrate. In other words, imagine this, you're drawing, 1,200 cc's are coming into my glomerulus every minute, and of the 1,200 that comes in, about 125 will get filtered out into the capsule. The other 1075 will come in the glomerulus and it'll go straight back out. Okay? But 125 makes it into here, and that's your filtrate. Okay, so now I have 125 cc's of filtrate going into my tube. Is all 125 going to go through here and out as urine? Every minute? No, imagine how often you'd be going to the bathroom, right? If that were the case. Every minute, 125 coming out. No. Out of that 125 that makes it in here, your body actually reabsorbs 124 cc. And when we say reabsorbs, it basically goes back into the blood. Which means, at the very end of my tubule, how much urine do I have left? Just 1 cc. Yep. So at the very end of that 1 minute, at the end of my sucking duct out to my urine is only going to be 1 cc. Right? Which is one reason, right? You make 1 cc of urine a minute on each kidney. That's 2 cc's a minute, which means about what? It'll take you about probably 3 to 4 hours to fill up your bladder at this rate to get about 500 cc's in the bladder, which is more reasonable, right? You go to the bathroom about every 3 or 4 hours. Okay, so that's the job of your kidneys. Yeah.
So what about pregnant women that have to, when they come out?
Yeah, great question. What is it about pregnant women that makes them have to pee more often? So you might be thinking maybe this rate is off, right? You're making more urine per minute. Not the case. For pregnant women, this rate is still constant, but just think about the location of where the bladder is. Where is the baby relative to the bladder?
On top of the bladder.
Right on top, right? So a normal person, the bladder can expand to hold about easily 500 cc's, no problem. But in pregnancy, because the baby is right on top of the bladder can't expand as much, so you just can't physically hold as much urine in the bladder, causing it to have more pressure, causing the micturition reflex to be activated a lot sooner. Okay. But again, this rate is still happening at the normal amount. You just can't store as much. All right. Okay, so what I just described to you is actually the whole process of the urine formation. So it's really going to be broken down. If we look at it, we start off with our blood, we filter it, and then from that we make the urine. And the 3 steps, right? First was you had to filter the blood. That's step 1 called glomerular filtration. So for that, you're going from the glomerulus, and then you're putting the blood into your tubule. The second step is to reabsorb. So tubular reabsorption. What ends up in your tubules, remember, is going to end up as urine. So in tubular reabsorption, you take any nutrients that are in your tubules and you reabsorb them or put them back into your blood. So that way you can keep all of your nutrients. The third step is called tubular secretion. What does it mean to secrete? To release, right? Or to get rid of, like you secrete tears, you secrete sweat, right? To release. Tubular secretion is to release or get rid of any remaining waste. So any waste that you have in your blood, you want to make sure it ends up in your tubule, and therefore you can actually excrete it as urine waste. Right? So those are your 3 steps. Filter your blood, make sure you reabsorb all the nutrients back into your body, and then make sure you secrete all the waste out of your body.
So, why is secretion happening after reabsorption? Isn't the filtration, doesn't it already have all that material in there?
These steps 2 and 3 are happening simultaneously. So you're going to be working together at the same time, reabsorbing your nutrients and secreting your waste. All of that's happening at the same time.
So what's the point of filtration then if those 2 things can happen beyond filtration?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about filtration and see what some of the problems of filtration are, which is why we need steps 2 and 3.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about filtration. We'll get through filtration today. Filtration is that initial process of having your blood come into the glomerulus and get filtered out into the capsule. So again, the glomerulus is your blood coming in, and then your capsule is capturing whatever the filter is. This is actually a passive process. It doesn't require energy. The reason why your blood is getting filtered is simply due to blood pressure. Remember we talked about the heart pumping blood out, and what's a good healthy blood pressure?
140 over.
120 over.
120 over 80.
Like 80, right? That's kind of your classic. The 120, remember, is your systolic pressure. It's the force of which your blood comes out of your aorta. That force coming out of your aorta carries all the way through to the blood going into the glomerulus of your kidney. So it's that pressure coming from your heart that's causing the blood to get pushed through your glomerulus and be filtered. So that's this hydrostatic pressure that we're talking about. So when the blood filters through your glomerulus, right, the filtrate gets pushed through. Think of it as like a coffee filter going into a cup, right? If you have your coffee filter on the top and you're pushing or having the water go through, and then you have the cup on the bottom capturing everything that comes through. In this case, the cup would be this glomerular capsule in yellow, capturing everything that gets pushed through. Right? Now, if you use that analogy of a coffee filter, what should get captured in the coffee filter? What are you supposed to get in the coffee filter?
Grounds.
The ground. Why did the ground get caught in the coffee filter? Why do they not go through?
They're larger than the holes.
They're too big, right? The coffee filter has holes in it. The ground should be too big, so they get caught by the filter. And then what goes through is the water and like the coffee flavor, right? The same thing here. Surrounding your glomerulus is the equivalent to the coffee filter. It's this little membrane here. The membrane is called podocytes. So what the podocytes do is they wrap around the entire glomerulus. So you won't see just a naked glomerulus with red blood. You'll instead see this yellow covering. And again, that's called the podocyte. And they have little holes in them. And so their whole job is to make sure the blood getting filtered through from the glomerulus capillaries into the capsule meets a strict size criteria. So, the size criteria for the filtration membrane is set. And it's set at 3 nanometers. So, what fluids and solutes can go from the glomerular capillaries into the glomerular capsule depends on what can go through that podocyte membrane. And the size of the holes of the podocyte membrane is 3 nanometers. So anything that's smaller than 3 nanometers will make it through. And just to kind of give you a reference as to how big 3 nanometers is, if you take a meter stick, which is about 3 feet long, a nanometer is 1/1,000,000,000 of that. So imagine taking a ruler stick and dividing it into 1,000,000,000 pieces, and that'd be 1 nanometer. So if it's smaller than 3 nanometers, it'll go through. So let's realistically think, in a chemistry level, what is smaller than 3 nanometers?
Maybe glucose.
Any guesses?
But I don't know.
Urea.
What about water?
Yeah.
Water is smaller than 3 nanometers. What about a single ion, like just a sodium or a chloride? Yep, those are smaller than 3 nanometers. Yep, so water, sodium, chloride. Sugar. A simple sugar like glucose, that's actually smaller than 3 nanometers. Remember, glucose is just a monosaccharide. A single amino acid, not a whole chain of them, so not a huge protein, but a single amino acid is actually smaller than 3 nanometers. That'll go through. And a lot of your nitrogenous waste, like urea, will go through, no problem. So all of these things will automatically get filtered through my glomerulus into my capsule, and it'll head into my tubules as filtrate. Okay? Now, what is larger than 3 nanometers? Should you ever see blood in your urine?
No.
No. Red blood cells, white blood cells, they are larger than 3 nanometers, so they should not go through. Proteins, right? Remember, proteins are long chains of amino acids. They are larger than 3 nanometers, so you also should not see protein in your blood. That's part of the urinalysis. They check for protein, they check for blood. You shouldn't see either one of them. They're too big to go through this filtration membrane.
So what disorders lead to seeing blood or proteins
Infection.
in the urine?
Yeah, good question.
Injury.
So they say like, hey, when you urinate, if you see blood, that's a problem, right? So think about this. What might be one way in which blood or proteins might get through? What might have gone wrong?
Infection.
The podocytes Defective.
Something that tore the membrane, right? Like something that made a hole in the membrane, or in other words, the podocyte, right? So it could be something as simple even as like a huge blow to the back is enough to inflame and rupture the membrane temporarily, and then you'll see blood and proteins in there. An infection could also disrupt the membrane, right? Make holes in it, cause blood and proteins to go through. Yep. Another thing, actually not even here, but we'll talk about later on, is like a UTI, a urinary tract infection, will actually cause some blood cells to get into the tubules, not here at the membrane, but later on. Yeah, good question. All right. So again, we shouldn't see proteins in blood because they're too large to go through. But these things we'll see. Okay. So, what I wanted to do right now is we'll quickly go through this. Actually, let's do this together. We're going to together label on our diagram, one, where does glomerular filtration occur? So between where and where on your diagram? Is it happening over here at the collecting duct?
No.
No. Is it happening between this blood over here?
No.
No. Which blood is it happening with? The glomerulus, right? This is the blood that's doing the filtering, and the what? And the capsule. So we want to label number one. I'm going to label it right here. Right? I'll put off to the side here. One. Glomerular filtration. Okay. All right. Two, or second step, draw an arrow for the direction in which the solutes are moving. So when I filter, which way am I going? Am I going glomerulus to capsule, or am I going capsule back to glomerulus?
Glomerulus to capsule.
I'm starting with my blood, right, in my glomerulus, and I'm heading into my capsule. So that's my arrow drawing the direction. Now, third, write which solutes are being filtered from the blood into my tubule. So what's the rule? What does it have to be smaller than?
3
3
nanometers.
nanometers. So I'm going to put here anything less than 3 nanometers. So give me examples of what's less than 3 nanometers.
Water.
Water.
Amino
Glucose.
acid.
What else?
Single amino acids.
Amino acids. What else?
Sodium.
Sodium.
Chlorine.
Chlorine. Yep. Urea. Right. So notice all of these items got into my tubule. Right? They started off in my blood and they got filtered through. So now in my tubules I have water, I have glucose, I have amino acids, I have sodium, I have chlorine, I have urea. So this is again step one. Does anyone see a problem with this? Remember, anything that ends up in my tubules, if I keep it in my tubules, what's going to happen?
It'll exit as
It's
urine.
going to become urine. Do you want to urinate out your glucose?
Not all of it.
No, right? What do we need glucose for?
Cellular respiration.
Energy, right? So we're going to need to keep some glucose. Do you want to urinate out all of your sodium?
No.
No. Your amino acids?
No.
No. Notice in here there's a lot of good nutrients that we actually want to keep, right? So that's why we're going to need step two. Step two, remember, is tubular reabsorption. So in step two, we're going to make sure we take these nutrients that are in my tubules and reabsorb them back into my blood so that way I can keep them.
Does that require ATP?
Good question. Is that going to require ATP? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Certain ones will happen passively, just through simple like diffusion. Others will require some active transport, which would require energy. Okay. Good. Other questions?
So there must be, like if we have a ton of sodium, then it wants to eliminate the sodium, and if we don't, then it wants to keep it. So there must be some mechanism telling it when to do that.
Right. So the question is, if we have like a lot of sodium, we might want to actually secrete some extra.
Right.
But if we don't have enough, we want to reabsorb all of it. And so I'll show you guys as we go through what are the steps and how to know how much of sodium to reabsorb and how much we can lose. And then you might notice with glucose, right? With a diabetic patient we talked about last week, right? The problem is they end up with too much glucose in here and they're not able to reabsorb all of it. So the glucose actually does end up as some of their urine. Because again, just so much, you don't have the time to reabsorb it all. Okay, so make sure you add this to your diagram because when we talk on Wednesday and continue with it, we're gonna make sure we follow the steps to make sure we can reabsorb the nutrients that we want to keep. Okay, so what I want to do and give you guys time for if you need it for the last 5 minutes is what I need from each group today is a list